Simon Says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
One of the most common tools that you'll be using is the selection tool. So if we look over here in the upper left of our toolbar, we're going to see this black arrow. Now the selection tool allows you to not only select objects, but also resize objects and rotate objects, and also give you information about the objects. So as an example, if I were to click on this, I select it, and you'll see I get this little bounding box around it. Now if I go over here to the corners, you'll notice I can go ahead and click and drag, and I can resize it. If I come outside of the corner, you'll notice here I get this little kind of button hook, and it's going to allow me to rotate. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to this arrow, do the same thing, come to the corner, and just simply click and drag. Now, a nice little tip is if I hold down the Shift key as I do that, it's going to lock into place every 45 degrees. So I know I want to do a perfect arrow facing left, I can hold down the Shift key, and it will lock into place for that rotation. Now, you'll also notice that when I select it, I will also have a whole bunch of options over here in my Properties panel. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the Properties panel in this course. But the thing to understand about the Properties panel is that it's context-based. So if I were to select on this object, you'll notice I'm going to get a whole bunch of options to know about that, the properties of that particular file. And if I go over to here to my text, now if I select on the heart, you'll notice that when I click on it, it shows me the fill color. That's fantastic. And you'll also see that I can see the fill color here and the fill color there. Let's click on my star. You'll notice that the fill color now changes to reflect that color yellow. So you have to select it to affect it. So just understand that that is what the selection tool does. Now, many times you will have an opportunity to double click on an object. So for example, if I were to double click on the star, you're going to see this takes me into what's called isolation mode. Certain objects require you to double click on them using the selection tool to be able to drill down and see that this object may be a group, it might be a compound path, it might even be some text. If you double click on it, you'll be able to edit it. I'm going to go ahead and click on this little back button to get me out of isolation mode. The other thing to understand is that certain things may not be clickable when you try to click on them. As an example, let's go over to here to our layers panel, which we brought up in an earlier exercise. And I want you to notice that I have two layers. We're going to go all into layers in just a little bit, but I just want you to notice this first thing here is that this has a little lock icon. And then notice it's BG for background. And if I were to open this up, you'll be able to see that there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So as an example, this background I cannot click on because it is locked. So if I unlock it and then I click on it, you'll notice now I can click on this and I can go ahead and move this text around if I want to, and I can even delete it if I wanted to. So I'm just going to click on edit and then undo, edit and then undo, and it comes right back. Or just notice the shortcut key of Control or Command Z to undo as well. All right, so just understand that using the selection tool, I can select something and then affect it in terms of moving it, in terms of rotating it, resizing it. And if something is not selectable, it might mean the fact that it's locked. So just keep that in mind. Now in a little bit, we're going to talk about its counterpart, the direct selection tool. But I just want to first make the distinction about what this tool does. And it's a very basic tool, very helpful tool, and it works well with the Properties panel as well as the Layers panel. So practice that briefly, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In the last lesson, we discussed the regular selection tool, and that allows us to select an entire object, move it around, and rotate it and resize it. Now, in this lesson, we're going to talk about the direct selection tool, and it tells you here, select and adjust anchor points and segments to reshape paths. So when you create shapes, when you are drawing out vector graphics, they are known as paths, and there are all kinds of different points throughout that allow you to manipulate it called anchor points. So let's just choose our direct selection tool, and then I'm going to select my object. I want you to notice that all throughout this object are these little blue dots. These little blue dots are our anchor points, and easily I can then manipulate them. So if I simply click there, I want you to notice how that gets activated, and I have these little handles that appear. These are known as our Bezier handles. They are named after the person who invented this. So I'm just going to click on this middle one right there, and then just simply click and drag to then move it in a variety of different ways. Let me go ahead and click on this one, and this time instead of clicking and dragging, I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard to just give it a little nudge up. And I'll go ahead and do this one, and I'm going to select it. Notice it's now solid blue where the other ones are hollow. That's Illustrator's way of telling me that it has in fact been selected. And this time I'm going to go left, and just notice it's going 1 pixel at a time. But this time I'm going to hold down the Shift key with my arrows, and then it goes 10 pixels at a time. So this is going to allow me to have all kinds of different creative control over my illustrations. This time let's go ahead and click on this one. Then notice how this is now solid where the rest. Let me click away. Notice how now this one is solid, and now I can click and drag on this and have a very different shape very quickly. So let's come back to here. Different shape, but still a shape nonetheless. Using my direct selection tool, I'm going to click on this guy. So now notice how this is all made up of anchor points. So if I wanted to be a little bit more creative with this, I could simply click on that one anchor point. And again, noticing how this is a solid blue where all the rest are hollow, and I can very easily click and drag on it. Now Illustrator is giving me a little bit of feedback that my mouse is right on top of it as I do that, because it can be very easy to miss it in case you try to click on it and you're not understanding why it's not working. So you'll notice that as I mouse over it, I'm getting a tiny little square right beneath my arrow to tell me that I'm right on it. Notice I'm not. Now I am. So I simply click and drag, and bam, there I am. Now, some of these are going to have the option to adjust what's known as the curve. Okay, so let's go ahead and just take a look. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm just going to do Control or Command minus, and holding down my space bar, I'm clicking and dragging. And I'm just going to simply click on this and then now select this. This is a curve. As a result of being a curve, I get the Bezier handle that I can now click and drag to then adjust that curve. I can go up and down. I can also go to the right to make it wider. And I can also go to the left to make it more narrow. Do you see that? How it's changing the slope of the curve. So I just want to make it a little bit more bulbous. I can do that. Let's do the same thing on this side. Okay, I'll do that. Click and drag. And I just want you to see here, that's now going to be a very different shape as a result, giving me full control over how I want to work with that shape. When you are working with non-curves, or you're working with these little corners, you are not going to get those little Bezier handles. Okay, this one has a half Bezier because it curves into this one, but down below it does not, so there's only half a Bezier. So just understanding that. Clicking on this, no Bezier. I click and drag on that, and then I can very easily move it around. One thing you will notice, though, is that for some of these, particularly the corners, you are going to see things like this. Okay? This is going to give us the option to convert it from a hard corner into a curve. So if I move my mouse on top of it, you're going to see Illustrator is communicating to me with that little sort of curved icon. Now watch what happens when I click and drag on that. I can now change that shape. So it's now gone from being a corner into a curve, and both of these now should have little Bezier handles associated with them, and then I can even adjust it if I wanted to, going in whatever different direction. Okay, so really a lot of control to work with these. Later on, we're going to learn how to create some of these things from scratch. You're going to learn how to use the pen tool, and the pen tool and the direct selection tool work nicely with each other because one is going to allow you to create it and the other one is going to allow you to manipulate it. So the direct selection tool allows us to select what already exists and then reframe and redirect and modify those shapes. All right, so one of the more common tools that you'll be using, especially if you're going to be doing illustration. We're going to continue our lesson on selection tools by discussing the Lasso tool. So notice you move your mouse over it, gives you a nice little preview of what it is, and you'll also notice that the shortcut key is a Q. So a little sense of humor and creativity from the folks of Adobe, because if you look at the Lasso icon itself, it looks like a Q. So easy way to remember that. Now the Lasso tool works the way that you might expect it to, where you sort of just drag around the content that you'd like to select. Now I'm going to bring up my layers panel just so we can see what our layers look like here. And just notice here I have my background layer and I have my objects, and I have a whole bunch of individual objects within this layer. Now if I lock it right now, I can just simply click on that. You'll notice I'm locking all of my background objects, including the color of the background and all these individual letters that are here. I'm doing that on purpose because when I select something, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally select something else. We're going to go into layers a little bit deeper later on, but let me just show you here how it works. I'm just going to simply just click and drag over the top of this star, and you'll notice that I now get all these little anchor points highlighted and some of them not highlighted. Okay, so you'll notice here that these are dark blue and these are white. So if I just start, for example, use my arrow keys and kind of bump this up, you'll notice that only the ones that are dark blue now get affected by me tapping on the arrow keys. Okay, so that's really nice because it allows me to then just select little bits there without having to really zoom in and using the direct selection tool. So you can see that's a nice alternative. I'm going to go ahead and click back on the regular selection tool and just kind of click away. And this time I'm going to use my Lasso tool to just select kind of a whole bunch here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag all around. You can see how that selects all of my anchor points. Really nice, really easy to do. Okay, now let's just go ahead and take a look at some other options for you here. So I'm going to unlock this layer, and I just want you to notice that way down on the bottom I have this one rectangle layer, and I'm going to click on this little circle here just so you can see a nice little trick of how you can select individual objects within a layer. If they're not being selected themselves, you can click on this little circle, and that will just isolate that one layer so then it's selected, and you know you're not going to get something else. And you'll also notice how I have this little red square there, and then this circle has a circle around it, just give me the indication that in fact it is selected. Now, if nothing is selected there, and I just wanted to just highlight, let's just say, the background there, I can just simply click on this, and just notice how I've just kind of touched it, and the whole thing gets selected there. Okay, and you'll notice even I have my little anchor points there, and if I wanted to, then I could go ahead and go back to my direct selection tool, which is the A key, or just simply click on it, and then click on the little anchor point there. All right. Now, each of these letters is also its own individual object. Okay, because what we've done here is we've done something called outlining our text, and we're going to talk about that in a future lesson, but you may want to isolate individual letters here, and it might be a little more difficult to go and isolate them here in the layers panel, so I can use my Lasso tool to do that. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to lock just my rectangle so I don't accidentally get too much selected here. And let's just say I want to have the YOU. I'm going to make sure that my Lasso tool is selected. And then very simply, I'm just going to drag around it. Make sure I'm going around it, not touching it. And then you'll notice how I get all of them selected here. Okay, so and even all the anchor points and everything. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and just deselect that. Now, if I have my Lasso tool here and I just accidentally just kind of click like this and I'm just kind of lazy about it, notice I'm not getting the top part there. Notice they're hollow anchor points. All right, so you really want to just kind of pay attention to what you're selecting on when you're selecting it, and just notice that the Lasso tool is going to allow you to select objects, and it's very much more about the anchor points that you're selecting rather than the whole object itself. All right, so practice that, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool allows us to have certain types of automatic selections. So for example, I have all of these colors blue here, and I like to select all of the objects that are blue on here. But it might be that I have this black stroke that I want to select, and I want to select all the objects that have a black stroke. So if you think about an illustration you may have that people are all wearing the same color uniform that you've drawn, and you want to change that color uniform from black to white. You can very easily do that by selecting all of those objects. So let's go over here to our magic wand tool, and you're going to see it's going to tell us what it's going to do. You can see the keyboard shortcut, everything like that, nice little graphic visualization of what it does. But let's go ahead and go a little bit deeper into this tool before I show you what it does by double clicking on it. Now, this is a very important and very unique nuance to Illustrator, that many of these icons, many of these tools have the ability to double click on them to see extra options available to you. Now, I just double clicked on the icon and now this just appeared. Now, when this appears, it's going to ask us, well, what are we going to affect essentially when we're doing our selection? Are we looking at just the fill color? Are we looking at just the stroke color, the stroke weight, opacity, blending mode, that type of thing? So, for example, using the magic wand tool, now that it's activated, I'm going to simply click right here on this blue. And you'll notice that I click on one blue and every single one of these objects that has a fill color of blue will then get selected. Now you'll notice that there's also a tolerance level. Well, let's just say, for example, I have a slightly darker blue or a slightly lighter color blue. Depending on the tolerance I've chosen, it's going to select those. So the higher tolerance, the more sort of open it's going to be to say, hey, listen, you're kind of blue, I'll go and add that. If you lower that down, there's going to be less of a chance that you're going to get it selected. So depending on what you have that selected as, you have kind of different gradations of a blue, you might want to just adjust your tolerance. Now let's go ahead and go to my stroke color now. And I'm just going to just deselect here, just good practice. And I have my stroke color. And this time I'm going to choose all of the whites. So I go over to here, go to my magic wand tool, and I'm going to simply just click here. And you'll notice that I selected on the object. Now I didn't select directly on the stroke color, right? But you'll see that as a result, it actually just did the red and the white, It did all of those, but it didn't do the red and the black. It didn't do the blue and the white. Okay, so very important there. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect. Okay, but this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect fill color. So therefore, only objects that have a certain stroke color will then get affected. So let's go ahead and now do the white again. I'm going to click on this. And now you'll notice that every single object that has a white stroke color now gets selected. Earlier, I had both of these selected. So therefore, it was like, okay, well, both of these things have to exist in order for that object to then be selected. Okay, so just keeping that in mind how that works. So let's go ahead and just try one more. I'm just going to go ahead now and just deselect this one here, go to my stroke weight, and you'll see now it says, okay, well, we have kind of a tolerance of 5 points. Okay, as opposed to this other unit of measure of tolerance, which is no points or pixels. It's just basically sort of a percentage. You're going to see here is a point. So I'm going to go ahead and just deselect now, come back to my magic wand tool, and let's just bring this down a little bit. And I'll just bring this down to, let's just say 2. All right, very good. Now it's only about the stroke weight, and I only want ones that are going to have that level of stroke. So notice I'm only getting the ones that have a very thin stroke there. So they really are giving you a lot of choices to work with here in terms of our fill color, our stroke color, and our stroke weight. And if you are working with opacity, you might want to then select all objects that have a certain level of transparency or opacity around it. Okay, so know the option is there at this point. I'm just going to focus on this since this is really just the beginning of the class. But note that if you are going a little more advanced, you do have other options for opacity and blending mode as well, which we will not be discussing in this course. But certainly some of you may be a little bit more advanced, so you might want to explore that. Okay, but really, really awesome tool, very easy to use. But just to remind you again, the tricky part is going to be that first part of just double clicking on that. All right, so one more time, I'm just going to close this, come back to this, double click on it so you can see what your options are. All right, so pause the video, practice that, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In a previous lesson, we have discussed the selection tool. The selection tool has a lot of different purposes and applications, including selecting, rotating, resizing. So if I rotate from the outside here, you can see me doing that. I'll go ahead and resize, just coming out from here. I'm going to go ahead and undo that by just going over to Edit, Undo, and I'm back to that. Now, Illustrator has a whole series of other transformational tools that you may prefer at different times. So if we come over here to the left-hand side where our tools are, you're going to see that I have the rotate tool. If I right-click on that, couched in there is my reflect tool. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on this little icon right there, and I'm going to bring this out so I can see them both just like this. Now to the right of that, you're going to see I also have my scale tool and my shear tool. We're going to focus on these. We're not going to be talking about the reshape tool in this class, but I'm just going to go ahead and bring those out just the same and have them over here. Now let's go ahead and see what they do. Now with this selected, I'm going to go ahead now and just choose this tool, which is my rotate tool. Now with this tool selected, I don't actually have to select the object itself. Notice there's no bounding box per se, but if you'll notice here, there's a little crosshair right there. At any place on the canvas, I can then click and drag. Notice that it's a little bit weird at first because like, wait, I can't see anything, I'm not grabbing anything, but I can really be anywhere on the canvas and rotate it. Bring that back. You'll also notice that if I hold down the Shift key, I'm also rotating it and locking it at 45 degrees, just like I did in a previous lesson. Pretty great. Now, you'll also notice, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here a little bit, that I have this little what we call a reference point or registration point, this little blue guy right there. I'm going to go ahead and back out again. And what that's going to do is basically set kind of like the fulcrum of how that's going to rotate. So again, you'll notice that when I rotate it, it rotates right there in the center of that little fulcrum. Now, if I now go over here and I just simply click, notice that fulcrum now gets lodged over here in the upper right. And now when I rotate, you'll see it's rotating around that fulcrum. So pretty neat. Now, a lot of us discover this kind of by accident. Like we didn't mean to click. And then we say, well, what's going on here? Why is it doing it there? Well, now you know, because this little blue guy is now dictating where it's going to rotate around. So I'm going to bring that right back, and then now it's right back in the center. Pretty cool, huh? Now, let's go a little bit deeper into this. So earlier we discussed the magic wand tool where I was able to double click on the magic wand tool and I was able to see some extra options. Now, when I double click on this, you'll see I get my rotate options. So if you know exactly how you want it to rotate, you can absolutely do that. So if I know for sure I want this to rotate, let's just say 90 degrees, I can go ahead and do that. And then watch this, I'm going to click on copy, and now it's done that. Beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and undo one more time. This time I'm going to go ahead and double click on it and I'm going to say 90, but this time I'm going to say copy. And you'll see that now, in addition to having my initial copy, I now have this copy. So not only did I rotate, but I also made another copy of it. Just right from this dialog box. You see, bam, I can go ahead and do that. Now let's do 45 degrees and choose copy. And now come back to my selection tool. Now I have a whole series of planes. Click away and you can see what I have there. All right, so a lot of functionality there. Now, of course, I could have double clicked on this as well. So I'm going to just select this, double click on this icon, and I pretty much get the same options. Okay, so earlier I double clicked on this one, and then on this one I double clicked. Right, same functionality, same outcome. So let's go ahead and explore some of these other ones. So with this one still selected, I'm going to now choose this guy here, which is my reflect tool. Reflection is going to be really important for when you are drawing out objects. So sometimes you have just one half of an object. Let's say you're drawing out a wine bottle or a face. The other side of that object that you've drawn is going to be identical to the one that you've drawn on the left-hand side. You might just want to reflect it. In this case, I just want to reflect it, so we're just going to have a little bit of a different side to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and just double click on that, and you're going to see I have my horizontal option, just like that, to reflect, or my vertical option. And notice it's giving me a preview. How's it giving me a preview? Because I have preview selected. So you can see here, if I want to do that, and let's just say I want to have them kind of go, nose to nose here, I have this as a horizontal reflect, and I'm not changing the angle. I'm going to simply choose copy, and now I'm just going to use my shift key and my arrow keys just to kind of nudge those up there. And now, without having to do too much effort at all, I've now reflected them. Now let me just move these out of the way so you can really see it. Okay, so again, all I did was just double click on it to get there. So here I was with this selected, I double clicked, and then you can play around with if you want to do a vertical reflection, horizontal reflection, and even potentially changing the angle when you do your reflection. But just remembering that one option is to copy, and the other one is just to make a reflection of that object, but not making a copy. All right, let's go ahead and now cancel that, and let's just check out some of our other options here. I'll just choose this one, come back to my selection tool, choose this one, and now you'll see I have this one, which is just the scale tool. Scale just means size. So far we've seen how we can do that pretty nicely and easily with our regular selection tool, but let's see what kind of tricks we have using the scale tool icon here. So when I click on that, you'll notice how my little bounding box goes away. And very similar to how I saw with my rotation tool, I don't have to click on any little bounding box or anything like that. I can just go ahead and move my mouse to the outside, and you'll see how it's now growing. Okay, and I can go this way, etc. Now you will notice once again that I have this little blue little crosshair reference point right there. That's telling me where it is in fact scaling from. So if I want to scale, let's just say from right there, I'm going to get a very different experience. So now I'm going to go back to this tool if it's not highlighted already, and you'll see now it's kind of just leaning on that part right there. It doesn't come from the center. So sometimes you really want it to sort of like have a base on one little part, and that's where this base is, and then it will then scale or grow right from there, or potentially even sync right from here as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and double click this time, and we'll see what other options we have here. And you'll see here non-uniform or uniform. Well, some of you have made notice that when I was resizing it, it wasn't resizing and constraining the proportions at the same time. So this time I'm going to say uniform. All right, let's go ahead and just click OK. And now let's just see what it does there. See, I can now make it scale out by going out this way. Okay, great. Now it's uniform. I love that. And now let's go ahead and see what our options are within the dialog box. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to go back to uniform, and this is going to give me more choices. So I'd like to make this maybe about 1.5 the times bigger. So I'm going to just do 150, and you can see there it is, and it constrains the proportions. Now, going a little further, you do have these options here in terms of scaling the corners and scaling the strokes and effects. In future classes, we are going to be talking about strokes and effects, and also for our corners. When you see that the object is not scaling to proportion the way that you like to see it scale, you may want to tell it, hey, you know what, Illustrator, you need to also scale the corners, because if you have decided that the corner radius is a certain number and it's not scaling them according to what the new size is, you may want to make these changes. All right, so just remembering that you have these options here. Same with strokes. If you decide that your stroke or your outline is, let's say, 5 points, but you also want it to grow as the object grows to make it be actually 50 points, you'd want to make this choice here. Okay? Or if you don't want it to, if you want it to remain thin, you can uncheck this. All right? Now, of course, I have this option to copy as well. So now when I click away, you will see that I have my original and I have my new one because I've now made a copy of this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And now let's go over here to our next one, which is going to be our shear. So if you'll see here, I have my shear tool. And then just like that, let's make sure that this is first selected. And now, just like how I had with my other object, I'm going to see here I have my little crosshair, my little registration point. And this is what shear is going to allow us to do. Maybe you want to shear this way. You're going to kind of give it the effect that it's sort of bent a little bit. You can see how, okay, I want it to be a little bit different than the rest of these. Maybe it's in the middle of turning. Maybe it's a different angle of sorts. You can absolutely do that. Okay, let's go ahead now and double click back on this and let's see what our options are here. Just knowing that I have other ways of adjusting this. So you'll see there's this little dial here. If I wanted to do it a little more manually and get a little preview of it, you can see I can do that. It's kind of neat. You can do it that way. And just notice how the numbers over here on the right-hand side change. I'm giving a nice little preview. Now, if you want to get kind of a real-time preview, if you click inside of this box where the degrees are, notice my cursor is in there. I'm going to use my little mouse wheel to then just incrementally resize it. See that? Okay, pretty neat. And you can see I'm seeing it in real time. I know exactly what I'm going to get as I'm getting it. When I click and drag on this, I have to wait to release the mouse to see it. All right, so okay, cool. Now that's the effect that I'm getting. All right, now we can check out some of these options here, kind of subtle options, but let's come over here to our angle of our axis and pretty much do the same thing. If it's a little bit too much of a hard angle, you can adjust that, bring that up, bring that down, and you can see what choices you're going to get. You have all the control in the world. All right, and then with these guys, slight different ones, you can see how it's going a little bit on the horizontal versus the vertical axis. All right, as you can see how it's all kind of rotating according to what's here in the center. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and just reminding you of, depending on where you have your registration point, if you have it up here, your outcome is going to be significantly different. Okay, so just keeping that in mind. All right, so it's a lesser used tool, this shear tool, but it's a good back pocket tool in case it comes up where you really need to make manipulations to your objects. All right, so definitely going next level with what we can do with our selection tool. So practice it, get comfortable with it, and we'll see you in the next lesson.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Sez IT.